Welcome to the Educator's Corner podcast, the show where we stay curious for a little bit longer. I'm Kai Basher, and in each episode, I'm joined by innovators from around the world as we explore the challenges, opportunities, and ideas shaping our schools and our communities. And if you'd like more insights and stories, subscribe to Kai Pod News, where I share reflections to keep the conversation going. You'll find the link to sign up in the show notes. As we move into 2026, I'd like to start with a question. What's the biggest challenge facing schools all around the world as we enter this year? For me, it's a no-brainer. It's teacher recruitment. And I'm reminded of the McKinsey report from 2007, which, following extensive research around the world, concluded that the quality of an education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers. And I think that goes for schools as well as education systems. But from the UK to India and across Africa and throughout the international school sector, many schools are struggling to recruit the teachers they need. Last year in England, we only recruited around 60% of the secondary teachers that we need in England, leaving a shortfall of roughly 10,000 trainees in a single year. Compare that to India, where they have 14 million schools and only 10 million teachers. If you then zoom out a little bit to the international school sector and you look at COBIS's research over recent years, COBIS reports that typically between 90 to 94% of international schools are finding recruiting quality teachers somewhat or very challenging. And then if we go completely global, by 2030, UNESCO estimates that the world will need an additional 44 million teachers to achieve universal primary and secondary education. If you're not convinced it's a serious issue, then maybe just try recruiting a physics teacher in the next few months. Today, to discuss this crucial issue for the future success of our schools, we have a really fantastic panel. I'm delighted to welcome back Leisa Grace Wilson, Editorial Director for Teach Middle East magazine and School Finder AE, and host of the Teach Middle East podcast. Malcolm Gladwell, I think, would probably describe Leisa as a connector as well as an empowerer and developer of educators and leaders. We then have Laura Rigney, Director of School Services of Teacher Horizons. She's been recruiting teachers and leaders now for more than 8 years, following a successful career as a maths teacher in Ireland, the UK, and also in the international sector. We also welcome back Mark Leppard MBE, headmaster at the British School Al Khubairat in Abu Dhabi, and a head teacher for nearly 20 years in the Middle East. Before a head teacher in Abu Dhabi, Mark was head teacher at Doha College. So, great to see you all here this afternoon. Is it really a teacher's market out there? Laura, you're recruiting teachers and leaders all over the world, and you have been doing for some time now. Is it really a teacher's market?
It's a great question because we placed teachers and leaders in 82 countries last year. So my short answer is yes, but I think only for some teachers and some schools. As you know, as you mentioned, the sector's reporting a global teacher shortage in high growth regions like the Middle East, Southeast Asia, but also particularly for specialist roles. And I think certain groups have got a stronger leverage than others. So the high demand subjects, obviously the DP maths, physics, computer science, SEN, counsellors, and also the leaders from sort of very experienced, accredited, high-performing schools. It's interesting because at the Fabisia conference recently, we referenced a statistic that we collected that 50% of teachers and leaders leave their schools after each 2-year contract. So there was quite a high turnover that we're experiencing, and lots of schools said that that was not their truth. And so tier 1 schools and schools that are more desirable have a longer turnover, sort of not such a high turnover rate to be managing.
So, Mark, if I was applying for a job at your school, I'm hearing great things about Abu Dhabi at the moment. It sounds like the place to be. But let's say I'm applying for a job at your school, and apparently your school is the school to be at in Abu Dhabi. Is it a teacher's market from your experience?
Currently, and I'm just speaking about our school, we haven't had a problem recruiting, and we've had quite a diverse range. So the typical one where there's maybe a problem is maths and physics. We've had a little bit more challenge for English, but we've still had a good field. But for a primary teacher's role, I'm getting at least 40 quality applications per post. I think it depends on the subject. I think it depends on the school's reputation. I think it depends on the location. So to give you an example, a male PE teacher in the region, you would have a huge amount of applications. A physics teacher, you would have less. But I think the schools that are quality schools and very transparent will have less problems. I'm not saying there isn't a problem, but we're not seeing it within our school at the moment, Kai.
So it's a very high profile, very successful, very desirable school, both for teachers and parents. Leisa Grace, you've got a bit more of a UAE-wide perspective. From that perspective, would you say it's a teacher's market in the UAE?
Yeah, I actually would say it is a teacher's market in general in the UAE. I was listening to Mark and I was thinking, you lucky, lucky man. That is not the case in other places. There is definitely a shortage of teachers, and I'm talking about quality teachers. I'm not talking about just anyone who wants to apply to teach because there is no other option for that particular person at the time. I'm talking about quality, professionally qualified teachers. There is definitely a shortage, but it definitely does vary from school to school. And what you find happening as well is that a teacher will, and we might look at this later on, they might start out in one school as a stepping stone and then move on pretty quickly to somewhere more desirable. And that always leaves that first school in a lurch looking for somebody else. So is it a teacher's market? 100%.
So from the teacher's perspective, what do you think then might be up for negotiation in a teacher's market, Laura?
It's funny you say this because I think over the last few years I've seen more and more negotiation tactics being employed on both sides. And one such example was a few weeks ago, a candidate had asked whether her cats could be considered as her dependents, which I thought was quite a funny question to be asking. And I think there's that idea that candidates know, especially if they're very strong, they know that they could have multiple offers, and it is quite early in the season to be accepting an offer. So I think on both sides, some interesting developments I've seen. Candidates maybe requesting a bump up the pay scale when there's fixed salary scales, but just trying to get a little bit more than what they've been offered. And also, interestingly, some schools are now doing flexible contracts where there's a medley or sort of an array or menu of different benefits. So it might be extra baggage allowance or a gym membership to a health club. One school in Cairo that we're working with has these flexible contract arrangements where candidates can pick and choose. And I think just building in some sort of flexibility is quite helpful for candidates that maybe are looking for something a bit different.
So Mark, at your school, one of the most popular in the region, is anything up for negotiation?
Yeah, look, I don't mind people negotiating, and because I think the hardest person to negotiate for is yourself. I think people don't do that naturally well, particularly in education. So I don't mind a negotiation. We've had people negotiate the scale, where they move along the scale. So they might come in with other experience that's not necessarily teaching, and we say, well, that can be of value, and we would consider that. We've had negotiation on housing. So all of our staff in their first 2-year contract are given school provided accommodation, and they move to an allowance. But over the last probably 7 years, most of our recruitment has come from within the UAE. So people moving from Dubai to Abu Dhabi or within Abu Dhabi to our school. And we don't then feel it's necessary to put them in school provided accommodation if they're in the region and they can find it themselves. And for them, that's a really big thing, that they have a choice immediately. And I think that for us, that makes them feel at home quicker and settle quicker. So we negotiate on that. So I'm not adverse. There's not a lot. I have had someone try and negotiate on salary 3 times in the same interview, and they didn't get offered a job on that basis, because I thought then it's not so much the negotiation, they're just not listening to the answer. And I need people to be able to listen when they work at the place. So it was more, I just thought they were persistent rather than trying to negotiate. And that sort of put me off, if I'm honest. So I think it is a real balancing act, and it could lose you a job, or it could be attractive. And how much are you willing to try and gain for your dream job as opposed to get the dream job? I think it's a tricky balance, if I'm honest.
This teachers market, Leisa Grace, is this contributing in a significant way to the high turnover? We're hearing 23% of schools globally reporting turnover rates of 20%. What impact is this having on teacher movement across somewhere like the UAE?
When you talk about negotiation, it's a two-way street. Some schools will allow you some room for negotiation. Others are pretty fixed. And so a teacher will then weigh it up. They'll go, they're not moving on the salary. I'll do a 2-year contract with them, and then I'll find somewhere else that might be a little bit more flexible. So it then comes back to bite that school a little bit, because they can't then attract and keep the quality that they would want. Is it leading to the high turnover if they're inflexible with their negotiations? Potentially, yes. What I think is also true is that when schools come with certain scales and they say they're fixed, while others might allow some negotiation, that news travels around quite quickly. They say, oh, never discuss your salary. That never holds true. Teachers talk about their salaries with each other all the time. And so you'll find, oh, my friend works down there and she's on 2,000 dirhams more a month. And whenever a vacancy comes through, off I go to that school.
I've seen some comments and discussions on LinkedIn, for example, where it seems that some teachers, some leaders are getting frustrated against the different offers that different schools can offer in a free market like you've got in the UAE, where you have got a very market orientated education system. And I think all of us probably started our careers, and I spent quite a long time, 24 years in the English system, which had very clear standardized pay scales. A standard teacher in Leeds, you get the same salary in Bristol, you get the same salary in Birmingham. If you go to London, you'd get some allowance. But this variation, and I guess a lot of people coming to UAE from the English state sector, from the UK state sectors, they're coming into this market, which is quite different. And that seems to be at least partly attributable for this, high turnover. Do you think there's going to be a time where the MOE in the UAE and maybe other parts of the world are going to say, this is not good for young people in our schools, it's causing too much disruption, it's causing too much turnover. We're going to impose unified pay scales across the teaching profession. We need to standardize this. You're shaking your head, Lisa. You don't see that happening in UAE?
I don't. It can't. It won't work because of how the market is structured. Schools are in tiers. They're at different budget and price points. A statewide imposed salary scale with no subsidization from the government will never work. It just won't.
Yeah. So I think any frustration that educators might have of this great disparity across somewhere like the UAE, that's one of the outcomes you're going to get in a market-orientated education system. And perhaps we just have to accept that's going to happen. Laura, do you see this playing out on a global scale, this sort of market orientation of international schools? Do you think the benefits outweigh the problems?
I don't think it's going to be this case where any particular country or school system standardizes their salary scales, because there's too many factors. But one thing I think is really interesting is the generational shift. We've got a lot more Gen Z teachers now in the global workforce. I think by the end of this year, there's supposed to be 30% of the global workforce are going to be Gen Z teachers. And these are the teachers that are born from 1997 onwards. So they'd be the teachers that are in their 20s. Those are the teachers that are digital natives. They're very competent, confident with technology. And I think one thing they really value is flexibility flexibility. So one thing that was very interesting we saw on our side is that 80% of the Gen Z teachers want flexibility in some form, whether it be contractually, financially, hybrid opportunities, work-life balance opportunities. However, only 5% of leaders valued flexibility in contract negotiations. So there's a bit of a disconnect there between what the teachers are coming through and maybe looking for and what the leaders think is acceptable or maybe even possible within their parameters.
My experience of being within a school, I think a lot of colleagues seem to want transparent pay scales. They want consistency within a school. So while we might get flexibility or variation, let's say, across a region or across the world or across even a city, that once you're in a school as an employee, I think you want transparency, and that might mean you just want to know what other people are paid, but you want transparency, you want consistency. My experience is that employees within schools would actually want pay scales. I think COBIS, in its accreditation framework, you can't get COBIS accreditation unless you have a internally published pay scale. So is there a disconnect between what teachers who are in the market looking for jobs are asking for and what actually good schools offer? Because doesn't a good school have a consistent published pay scale? Mark, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you do inspections.
Yeah, well, yes, I do. And also our school, everybody's pay scale, not their actual pay, but their range. If you're doing that job, what your job can go from to for every single position in the school, including mine, is public knowledge within the school, I'd say. So, and if it goes by anything that Leisa said, it'll be public knowledge outside the school as well. But so we publish ours, and I think you touched on it. I was just making a note then. Transparency. I think equality as well, Kai. I think you've worked in the region long enough, and I think a number of schools are behind the curve from what other sectors are doing. So we still have a remuneration package which is based on how many children you have. So your housing will be different for the amount that, where I know when I was at Doha College, I changed that. I did the housing based on position. So and a lot of staff came in to see me who had children and said, "Oh, you're not caring for the families anymore." And then the other half came in and said, "I'm being paid for once for the job I do." So there's a lot. I think we're behind the curve on a lot of things in education, not around remuneration. But I think the one thing people do want is transparency, and the other thing they want is equality. So if there's two people doing the same job, why should one have a bigger housing allowance than the other person, where maybe you could do it based on position instead? And I think that's an interesting thing that we may be looking at in the future.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, I think it's something we always try to advise the schools that it's unacceptable to have different scales according to nationality. And I think one thing that completely baffles me, and it still happens, is when schools will ask us for the candidate's last pay slip, and they say, "Can you please send the last pay slip of the candidate?" And we say that's not something we will do. And still the process is, and this will be without referencing any school days, it's just very archaic systems where I'm trying to, and we always tell the candidates this too, don't compare like for like, because the purchasing power parity of the money in completely different countries is you can't compare like for like in many ways. So I think that's one thing for sort of candidates. What Mark and Leisa Grace both saying is transparency breeds trust then with the candidates. And if they start being asked, "Send us this and send us this," it shuts down the conversation. Many candidates then withdraw at that point.
Leisa Grace, I'm going to move on to the whole notion of families now and children. Is there variation in how schools in the UAE look at number of children? Because again, I hear stories anecdotally that some school groups or some schools just do not even consider applications from teachers who have got any children at all. Is that the case?
It's unfortunately it is. And by the way, I cover the entire Middle East, and we do find that UAE though has decreased the packages quite a bit in recent times. And when people ask me, and if they're a family, I'm often sending them elsewhere. And I know that's, because the family packages are shrinking. Many schools now only offer a free place to one child. Every other child is either at a small discount or they're full price. And they only offer medical insurance for the teacher and a spouse, maybe one child, maybe no one at all. And tickets, one ticket only for the teacher. No one else gets a ticket. Therefore, the packages are shrinking in real terms.
Yeah, I think the packages have changed. I think, again, we've maintained ours. We've juggled it around to make it a bit more flexible. But I've just lost one of my best math teachers I've ever known, and a great head of year, because we offer for 2 children, not 100%. We offer a heavy discount for 2 children. He's got 3, and we've been talking about it for a year. But I can't do that one compromise for one person because I've got 3 other people with 3 children, and I've got 142 staff children in the school. So that's more than a year group.
What is not up for negotiation? Laura?
Yeah, I would say age caps, age limits, so visa restrictions in China. It's very rare that a new candidate would get an offer if they have hit the age of 58, and I think 58 tends to be a good indicator for quite a lot of countries in the Gulf as well. Nationality-linked visa regulations, I'm sure Leisa Grace would know more about this than me, but I hear that sometimes it can be quite hard for ADEC to approve visas for candidates with certain backgrounds and certain heritages, and no one will ever know until the approval of the visa goes through. So that's something I don't think anyone can have a control over. Obviously, the subject-related degree in the UAE and many other countries is a given. You have to have that. Certain other restrictions are quite strange, like you need to have 5 years experience to work in Indonesia. You need to have a master's to work in the Netherlands. There's so many little things that I think if you're a candidate and you're looking for your job search, it's really good to research the ins and outs of visas, age limits, things that are taxable benefits and things that are not taxable benefits in certain countries as well. Like Japan has got quite interesting restrictions in that regard about taxable, non-taxable benefits. And also just, I would say, look at things above and beyond that are country specific. Like in Malaysia, they have something called the Employee Provident Fund, and you get a really good sort of savings offering, I think, with your contract. So there's some things that you have to pay by law, some things that the law can't change. And just doing research will help with that.
Okay, so do your research. And if I was researching your school, Mark, what's not up for negotiation?
Well, as Laura said, if there's something to do with compliance for getting a license, then that's not up for negotiation. Working hours wouldn't be up for negotiation. They want sort of, they're either full-time or not, or part-time, but that's what it states. I wouldn't negotiate. So I know you talked about, can people do remote working? That wouldn't be up for negotiation. Those sort of things. And we might touch on it later, but we wouldn't negotiate or compromise around safeguarding either. So if they haven't got the full checks, but said, look, they're in place, or I can get them, we wouldn't negotiate on that. That would be no.
Leisa Grace, anything else that you'd like to add that maybe is not up for negotiation typically across the Middle East?
Yeah, so certain things that would bar you from getting a visa in certain jurisdictions is just not up for negotiation. If you have certain pre-existing conditions, if that gets flagged, your visa will automatically not be approved, and that's the end of that process. And then you also, like you touched on before, there are security checks, and particularly for places like Abu Dhabi, where they do what they call familial background check. And they go very far back into your ancestry. And if they find any links that is not favorable in their eyes, you don't normally get an explanation, and you just get a rejection, and that is not up for negotiation at all.
Thank you for listening to the Educators Corner podcast. It's been inspiring to see so many new listeners join us and connect with these conversations. Your support helps us bring on influential guests, dive deeper into critical topics, and amplify the voices shaping education's future. If you haven't already, please hit the follow button. It makes a huge difference to me and the team. Thank you. Okay, so we've had a fantastic exploration of the current recruitment landscape, both from the teacher perspective and from the school perspective. I'd like now to sort of look ahead to the future and get some sense of where we think teacher recruitment might be going in 2026 and beyond. What trends might you be keeping an eye on, Mark?
We're going to have to keep an eye on getting those positions. And I think we're going to have to model, and I know you've done it at your school already, an online version if we cannot fill a position for, let's just say, a physics teacher. I think we're going to have to model what an online structure for certain subjects will be. And look, we don't have a great challenge on recruitment at the moment, but if all the stats that you talked about at the beginning are coming closer to us, I think more and more schools are going to have a look at not entirely remote, but some remote options available in problem areas of recruitment. So for me, that is what we're modeling at the moment.
And I guess what you're preparing for is that time when let's say you advertise for a physics teacher and you just can't get the quality you need.
The one thing, I mean, you've talked about the school's reputation. It's 56 years old, so it's not due to one person. It's always had a strong reputation. But the one thing we don't compromise is quality. And I think that's where your reputation gets hugely damaged very quickly. And I think your reputation will be held if you can't get a teacher physically because it's a short area, but you get the best quality person teaching the children or the young adults. So I think it's vital that you model that out.
Whilst people like myself who have been exploring these online and blended options now for more than 6 years, I guess that a key question, perhaps an increase number of schools are starting to have to ask themselves, while you would always prefer a face-to-face teacher from the student's perspective, from the parent perspective, is it better to have a quality physics teacher who's teaching online rather than maybe no physics teacher at all? Laura, do you see an increasing number of schools having to make that choice already?
Yeah, I think in 2023, when we first started talking about this, it was a very new concept and your flex ed approach was quite pioneering. But I would say we've had around 30 requests for remote teachers. And our last position that we are working on now is a very good school, an IB school in Portugal. So looking for a 6-hour-a-week psychology teacher. So on both sides of schools maybe are looking for this as another option, but the teachers as well. There's a huge demand. 86% of our teachers have showed interest in online or hybrid opportunities. So I think on both sides it's going to grow in the next couple of years.
Okay, and from a parental perspective, you've got 2 boys, Leisa Grace. How would you feel if they were going to have a physics online teacher next year, but they were a really good physics online teacher?
I'm not chomping at the bits about it, am I? I'm just, it's if it's the only option, then it's the only option. I'd rather them have something than nothing. And with the shortage that's looming or everyone's talking about, it could happen, you know. But what we need to be also mindful of is the fact that just because they're online, it doesn't mean that they can't be taught by real qualified people and that they can't gain the qualification they desire. So it's not undesirable. It's just that it's not the first choice.
Yeah, I mean, my advice to any school who's thinking about moving into starting to use remote teachers is to start using it as a strategic response to, let's say, extending the curriculum. We've introduced A-level psychology just over 18 months ago. We offered it straight away as an online option, not as we can't recruit a teacher as a crisis response. And we've had no pushback on that at all. And we're offering now A-level psychology online for the second year as those students move into year 13. And we've offered it as an option for the current year 11 as they move into year 12. So that seems to be much better than suddenly we can't recruit a teacher, let's get a computing teacher online in. Another area that we're going to see in this space is a real improvement and tightening up of safeguarding and safer recruitment. And I mean, Mark and I, as head teachers, Laura and Leisa Grace, in your roles, I'm sure you've heard far too many stories of schools experiencing really serious problems where safe recruitment just isn't happening, or isn't happening in a way that you'd expect it to. And so I think a really welcome development in the last year or so is the establishment of the British International Schools Safeguarding Coalition, where we've got organisations such as COBIS, AO, BSO, BSME, Phobia, LHHC and NABS working together to support schools strengthen their safeguarding approaches, their safer recruitment approaches. Mark, do you see this as something that's going to change over the next couple of years?
I think it's continually moving, Kai. And I've noticed more and more demands positively for checks, more robust. And we recently tried to recruit a temporary maths teacher, so someone for 2 terms to cover someone's long-term absence. And we had a candidate, but not all their checks were in place. And we were desperate for the maths teacher, but we've said, no, we can't cross that barrier and say we'll compromise. So I think schools are getting better. I think checks are getting more rigorous, and the demands are getting more and more on the HR department. But there will be schools that haven't got an HR department. There will be schools that are not members of those organisations. There will be schools that cannot afford all those checks in terms of time. It's not saying they're bad schools. So I think what is probably going to happen is the schools that follow very best practice in those organisations and beyond are, no one's 100% safe, but they will be seen as harder targets. And those people who really want to get into a school will look for a soft target. So I think it is stopping more and more schools being accessed by perpetrators, but I think they'll then look for soft targets. And I think that's where the big associations, we're in a number of them ourselves, have to help some of the schools not in those associations. I think safeguarding is not about a member organisation. It's the compromise of your school, the children, the staff. And I think we've got to reach out. I think the next stage should be that the organisations help some schools who are not in those organisations.
Leisa Grace, do you see this improvement across the region that Mark's talking about, improvement in safer recruitment?
What I see is an increased conversation around the topic. And yes, there is definitely improvement. But, most improvements start with the conversation first, doesn't it? And once that goes wide, then you have the actions that follow. What Mark said is very important. The schools that are not in these organizations will become softer targets for people who want to infiltrate the system. What will need to happen is safer recruitment, safeguarding needs to be outside of organizations and needs to be rather universal. There needs to be very strict policy and very strict procedures to follow when it comes to recruitment that sits outside of any individual organization, because we're talking about children. And you wouldn't want to hear that they didn't go to Mark's school because they are really strict and they check all the checks, but they went to X school down the road because it's more lenient and they're not as rigorous. But guess what? There are students in those schools that are at risk. So no one wants that in the system. So now we need to start to think system-wide. How do we then make it safer for all children? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there you picked up on, Leisa Grace. And I think we've got 15,000 international schools. The number's grown by, I think, at least 200 every year. So this international schools market, where we've said, okay, we can tolerate the freedom for schools to set their own salaries, but perhaps this is a really strong example where there needs to be regulation right across the international school sector, where it doesn't matter what type of school you are, what organization you're a member of, what your fee point is. If you're going to set up as an international school, if you're going to get a license anywhere, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can safely recruit teachers. Do you see that happening globally, Laura, from your perspective?
There's been a lot more conversations around it, but more of a collaborative approach in recent years. So like the different affiliate companies, bodies moving together to share best practice, and groups like the Safeguarding Alliance, Emily Constantis, who's amazing, doing some amazing work. She always represents at the conferences too. From our side, we've made changes too. So checking all the domain names and all the email referees that come in, Google checks, social media checks, making sure there's a current principal in place. Just small little things, even doing verbal reference checks used to be done on the phone. Now we do them face to face through a video platform, so we can check the person that we're speaking to. And I think if everybody does their bit, it's a collaborative effort. But with schools that don't have minimum safeguarding requirements, we can't work with them because it's too risky from our side as well.
All schools need to be really mindful that while in the context of a global teacher recruitment crisis, it might be really tempting to appoint somebody quite rapidly when maybe they're the only applicant. And it's tempting to recruit them without the necessary checks. And I mean, I've got a really fantastic team, but they have to work really hard at making sure that they do all the checks and chasing head teachers up for references and verification calls. And like you say, you need to do a video call, because if you're doing a phone call, you don't know who's on the other end. So it takes a lot of effort and energy. But the harsh reality that we need to face up to is there are probably thousands of people out there who are trying to get into schools to get at young people for terrible reasons. And so I think the support of BISC, I think it's known as the British International School Safeguarding Coalition, is absolutely fantastic. I think the work they're doing, chaired by Emily, like I say, wonderful person, do some brilliant work. I know only this week they've been talking to the UK government about how to move this forward. But it really is a global challenge and a global issue that somehow we need global cooperation to make sure that our children, wherever they are in international schools, are as safe as they possibly can be. Remote teaching, safeguarding. Do any of you see any other emerging trends over the next year that we're going to see in the teacher recruitment space? Anything else that's changing?
Something that I have noticed with Gen Z teachers, as we've called them, is that apart from them applying for jobs, a lot of Gen Z teachers are now waiting to be headhunted because they've made themselves influencers in the space, where they have an online presence, they have a brand, and they are no longer joining the queue to apply for schools. Schools are looking at them and recruiting them in for additional marketing purposes, obviously, whatever expertise they have. I don't know, Laura, if that is something you've noticed, but I've noticed that because I have a couple of friends and colleagues who are in that space, online space, and they get offers from schools far and wide to join. Is that a trend you're noticing?
Yeah, I think I have seen teachers that represent themselves very well online, especially on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, the TikTok generation as well. And I think localized markets, let's say, imagine in UAE, a teacher is going to be long term in UAE. It's in their interest to put themselves out there as that sort of influencer in the space, because they will get picked up and seen. I think it's more of it's something that's going to grow as well.
People who are on TikTok tell me it's a hashtag. TikTok teachers is an actual hashtag. And there are loads of younger teachers, which this is going to age me now, but yeah, loads of younger teachers who are all over TikTok just showcasing their classroom practice, showcasing the resources they're using, talking about different ways they're engaging their students. And it's a constant flow of them.
We are getting the emergence of, if you like, celebrity teachers who have got a really strong online presence. And I wonder then, coming back to one of our earlier themes, they may well be able to negotiate quite flexible terms with you, maybe quite lucrative terms. And if they're pitched into the online space, you'll get online schools maybe like Merthyr Verneuil, Sophia High, King's Inter High, competing for these celebrity teachers to teach their kids. And I don't think we're very far from that at all. And that could, you would see a number of trends emerging there. The celebrity teacher, the online, the flexibility of the negotiation. So if that's the sort of world we're moving into, think of teachers first of all. I'm going to ask you now each what would your one tip be for a teacher, let's say, who's in their first 10 to 15 years in the profession? What would your one tip be if they're thinking of their next move?
Taking it back to some of the things we've talked about today, and so I think from a teacher perspective, if I was looking forward, what I'd want from a teacher, or how they're going to market themselves, or how they're going to put themselves in the marketplace, I'd want them to be relevant, so up to date with educational reading. I think they've got to read about the school they're going to and the region they're going to, all on the things we've talked about today. Look, I came out to the region 30 years ago where there wasn't the internet, so mine was a little advert in the TES. Kai, you'll be able to remember that. The ladies on here are too young for that. So, but you had a broadsheet paper with a column about the school. Now there is huge amounts of information to research, and I would definitely do your research both into the school, into the region, and not just use the school's marketing for that. There's so many forums, and go in with your eyes wide open, to be well researched, and I think that helps you in the interview. So then you can talk about the region, you can talk about the school, you can draw out stories about the school or strengths of the school that will appeal to the panel that you've actually done your research.
So develop your personal brand, think very carefully about it, and do your research. 2 tips there. Okay. Laura, do you want to go next?
Don't assume there's always something better coming along. So I think quite a lot of teachers we see reject offers, especially at the sort of pre-Christmas time. They get offers and they just think, maybe I can do better. Let's wait till January, and then they regret turning down an offer later on in the year when they don't have maybe something quite as good. So that could be one thing, but also just to be mindful of your long-term goals and consider steps that you might need to take to reach them. So again, on that note, maybe thinking I want to go to this school, but you might not be able to get there yet because you haven't got IB experience or post-16 experience or worked in the region before. So trying to make those stepping stones and think, where do I want to be in 10 years? How can I get there? Rather than just trying to get to the end goal straight away.
Thanks, Laura. Leisa Grace?
Yeah, I think one of the things you need to be mindful of is not all schools are equal. So as the other panelist says, do your research, but also make sure you're able to express very openly your impact in your previous role. Not just the job that you did, but what impact did you have? Because I think it's one thing if you want to be with everybody in the crowd, but if you really want to stand out as a candidate, talk directly to the impact. How did you move students teaching and learning along? How can you tangibly evidence the progress that students have made under your tutelage or your teaching? And also, I would say be very much open-minded as it comes to how students learn in different parts of the world. Don't think the way you did it is always the way it has to be done. Stay on top of your research and be very open-minded.
But I wonder actually if we're actually moving into a very different world, or we're starting to move into a very different world. I think this idea of the celebrity teacher and the personal brand, I wonder if it's going to be actually not teachers applying to us as schools, but us as schools going to car supermarket or going to the teacher supermarket, where we're going to see these great there's going to be a whole range of teachers we can look at and say, oh, we want to contact that teacher, or we want to buy that teacher in, or we want to buy that teacher in. Is the whole market going to turn upside down? I mean, if enough teachers get a really good, strong personal brand, aren't schools going to be looking for teachers rather than teachers looking for schools? There's an innovative, creative thought to leave you with. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you, Leisa Grace. Thank you, Mark, for your words of wisdom, your experience, and your ideas. The teacher recruitment crisis is going to continue, in my opinion, for a while. This isn't going to something that's going to go away. But it's really fascinating, I think, listening to all three of you. While we've got this crisis, which I think is going to deepen, we've also got a very dynamic teacher market, and we've talked about some really interesting things that are happening in the teacher market with teachers and also with schools. So this is crucial for the success of our international schools and schools everywhere. There's some fascinating evolutions that are emerging. So I think we're going to stay curious with this for a long time. You've been listening to the Educator's Corner podcast with me, Kai Basher. This show is created by British School Muscat and British School Salalah, with post-production by Communicating for Impact. For updates and insights, remember, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Kai Pod News. Simply follow the link in the show notes